Hi, my name is Toby Pierce, and I'd like to share a devotional thought with you today. Last time we saw Paul giving his famous sermon on Mars Hill in Acts 17, and so this time we're in Acts 18, beginning in verse 1. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked. For they were tent makers by trade. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. So Paul arrives in Corinth and meets Priscilla and Aquila. Silas and Timothy aren't there just yet. And Aquila and Priscilla came to Italy, or came from Italy to Corinth, because the Roman Emperor Claudius, forced all the Jews to leave Rome. Well, the city of Corinth was a big city on a little piece of land. It was a little piece of land called an isthmus. Corinth was and still is basically on what looks like kind of a land bridge between the Aegean Sea and the Ionian Sea. The land bridge is only about 3.5-4 miles wide, but between the two seas. And in Paul's day, people would drag ships across it to get to the other side rather than go all the way around the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Going around that thing would add weeks to their journey and take them through some pretty dangerous waters. Well, nowadays there's a canal that small ships can sail through. The canal is only about 81 feet wide, so it doesn't accommodate huge ships. Anyway, all that to say that Corinth was a major trade hub. It was a place where people from all over the world might pass through. And this made it strategically ideal for Paul's ministry. Aquila and Priscilla were tent makers, and so was Paul, and so they worked together. Aquila and Priscilla proved to be lifelong friends, who even saved Paul's life on one occasion at the risk of their own. He talks about that in Romans 16, verses 3 and 4. As for Paul working as a tent maker, he had every right to be supported by the church, but he did not want to burden the church. And the word supported is a key thought here. We don't pay a minister to perform certain tasks. We support a minister so that he's unburdened, and it makes it possible for him to minister to the congregation. So in verse 5, Acts 18, verse 5, when Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with the word, testifying to the Jews that the Christ was Jesus. And when they opposed and reviled him, he shook out his garments and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." Well, Paul felt an obligation, a debt to lost souls. He'd received so much grace himself that it was only proper for him to give back. We should feel that way too. If someone we encounter has not heard of Jesus, well, that's on us. Once a person knows the gospel, then whether or not they obey it, well, that's on them. Verse 7, and he left there and went to the house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord, together with his entire household, and many of the Corinthians, hearing Paul, believed and were baptized. So it's interesting that right after Paul says he's going to go teach the Gentiles, we see Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believing and being baptized, he and his whole family. Verse 9, beginning verse 9 now. And the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, "Do not be afraid, but go on speaking and do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you. For I have many in this city who are my people." And Paul stayed there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. So Paul gets reassurance from the Lord that he will not be attacked or harmed. So he continues to teach in Corinth for another 1.5 years. Even Paul needed encouragement. Speak encouraging words to your Christian brothers and sisters. Everyone needs encouragement. God told Paul not to be afraid. Fear is normal, but be courageous. It's not courageous if you're not afraid. Acts 18, beginning verse 12. But when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal, saying, "This man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law." But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrongdoing or vicious crime, O Jews, I would have reason to accept your complaint. But since it is a matter of questions about words and names and your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to be a judge of such things." And he drove them from the tribunal. And they all seized Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal. But Gallio paid no attention to any of this. Well, proconsul Gallio rightly kept the government out of a religious disagreement, and he was not swayed by the Jews that wanted to attack Paul. After Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, became a Christian, he and his whole family, that was back in verse 8, Sosthenes was made ruler of the synagogue. It's unclear why Sosthenes was beaten here, at least to me. But it may be, too, that he became a Christian and perhaps was being beaten by the Jews. This all happened in Corinth, remember? Well, later when Paul writes to Corinth in 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 1, he says that a man named Sosthenes was with him. And he calls him out like that to the Corinthian church. Sounds like it's probably the same Sosthenes to me. Well, that gets us through verse 17. We'll pause there and take up next time with the rest of the chapter. Think about these things. Be courageous and be kind. Save a soul. I hope you have a blessed day.
If you would like more information, or if you'd like to participate in our Bible studies and worship services, we would love to have you come join us at the Northeast Church of Christ in Albuquerque, New Mexico.